Welcome to MIDI's Innovation Vault podcast. In this episode of Medtech's Next Wave, Innovators from LSI, we're joined by Chris Harder, CTO of Kenota Health. Kenota Health is revolutionizing diagnostics and patient care, focusing on solving critical healthcare challenges. Founded by two entrepreneurs passionate about improving allergy management, Kenota recruited Chris to help re-engineer their core technology to better align with customer needs. Kenota Health's unique approach starts with the problem and customer, designing tailored technical solutions. Despite challenges in regulatory processes, technology development, and funding, they've successfully leveraged strategic partnerships to navigate these hurdles. Looking ahead, Chris discusses the exciting potential of converging diagnostic health technologies that could make testing more accessible, affordable, and effective at the point of care. Join us to hear how Kenota Health is shaping the future of diagnostics and patient care.
Welcome to the MIDI Innovation Vault podcast, where we'll explore breakthroughs and journeys in medical technology. I'm your host, Gregory Montalbano, co-owner and COO of MIDI Medical Product Development. In this series, we'll connect with trailblazing medtech leaders to discuss their personal journeys, their company's technologies, and lessons they've learned along the way. So today, I'm delighted to welcome Chris Harder, the CTO of Kenota Health. Kenota Health has been making waves with its innovative solutions in diagnostics and patient care. And Chris, thank you for joining us today on the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you so much, Greg.
Excellent. So to start, Chris, could you share a bit about your background and how you found yourself in the medtech world?
Sure. So I did the more classic science route, so undergraduate in biochemistry, and did a master's transfer and got my doctoral degree in biochemistry. But what I found is that I was gravitated towards the medical device part of it. So I got heavy into PCR and running the real-time PCR machines. I got heavy into microscopy. I'd go down to the machine shop or work with, the guys doing different setups to do like live cell, 4-channel optics and imagery. And so I really enjoyed the engineering part of the science, made my own little pumping system to wash cells very gently, these sorts of things. And so then I thought I was going to go on to postdoc, and had a couple offers. And my wife basically said, I don't want to move. And so I went to a career day and found a young founder and answered a couple questions in the audience while he was presenting on entrepreneurship. And he came up to me afterwards and hired me. And that was at my first position at Spartan Bioscience. And I was there for, 11 years.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like you're quite a renaissance man between the science of it and the fabrication and making things happen. So let's talk about Kenota Health. So how did the company get its start, and what inspired the development of your technology? Also, what sets Kenota technology apart in addressing critical healthcare needs?
So started by two young entrepreneurs, and they wanted to address real problems in allergy. And what they recognized was it took a very long time to get an allergy, diagnostic test. And so they created some really cool ideas, and they needed to turn those ideas into a product. And so, they looked for a product development experienced person, and I joined their team excited about it because I have a lot of allergies and it really affects the family. So what we did was we looked at their core tech and we looked at the problem. And it turned out that their core tech was either regulatorily infeasible or very long. The core tech was either not working equivalent to a simpler version of it. So we had to re-engineer a lot of things when I joined. But what we did was we actually started off where I think most companies should, which is you have to start off with the problem and the customer, and then you make the technical solution fit the problem and the customer. And when you've got enough of a vision across that, barrier, you have to make money. And so you have to solve the three parts. You have to solve the technical, which includes regulatory and performance and, all the analytical stuff that has to happen. And you have to solve the need. You have to solve a real problem and really understand the drivers for use and for your customer. And then you have to wrestle that with money and make money. And so the unique perspective that I brought to Kenota was, let's throw all that out, the past, and let's really deconstruct what problem we're trying to solve. And so we made the technology to solve the problem. We didn't develop the technology and then try and find a place to wedge it into, a medical problem. And so I think it sounds obvious, but it's fairly unique in the medical space to some degree, especially in vitro diagnostics. We usually get scientists coming up with assays or tests, and then they try and find a hole or a new hole for them. And so we did it a little bit differently. And so what we've done is we've taken a very simple technology and we've made it so that we can hit the tough FDA bars of CLIA waivability.
Excellent. And that's certainly a logical way to do it, to understand the voice of the customer, understand the needs, and work it the way Kenota has. So launching a company like Kenota in this industry can be quite a journey, as I'm sure you've experienced. So can you walk us through some of the challenges Kenota Health faced early on, and where are the specific hurdles in areas like regulatory process, technology development, and funding that you had to overcome?
So, it's a fascinating question. In an ideal world, and I think for some companies, they get given everything they need to get all the way to the end. And sometimes they even fail when they're given everything they need. So it's just like, well, let's look at comparables. What does it take a integrated system? For us, it was sample collection kit. It was test cartridges or panels of test cartridges and automated analyzer. What does it take to get that all the way to market? Maybe even regulatory approval would be your first regulatory approval. And you end up with a number in the diagnostic industry somewhere between 16 million US and 80 million US just to get your first regulatory approval. That doesn't include commercialization. And so it's very hard as a diagnostic company to find someone willing to give you that much money. And so you have to do it in rolling circles forward, which means you have to paint a compelling picture and you have to put it together, from a vision perspective so that, someone visionary who's affected by the condition will give you the money to be able to do it. And then you have to make it real enough to justify a larger valuation. And then you have to make it more real to justify another valuation. And then, ultimately there's different investors who are interested at different stages, but the technology has to follow the funding. You have to make it real enough at each stage to unlock the next round of funding, to unlock the next round of funding. And you have to know what investors want to see in terms of validation at each of those steps. So, very early on, it's the vision, it's the business case in terms of, how much money you're going to make, what are your costs at a very high level, and some kind of working prototype unlocks a certain amount of money. Then you've got to go through and demonstrate real performance, preferably, both in the lab or analytically as well as clinically. And then you've got some, next round unlocked. And then you usually get enough to do the full regulated studies. And you get enough to do, some early pilot scale manufacturing, and you got to work out all your process issues. And then, then you've got enough to sort of get a clearance or to get some approvals in different jurisdictions. You got enough to get your ISO. You got enough to get, a quality team in place. And then once you've got the clearance, then you get enough to do commercialization. And a lot of times people are looking for, 1 to 5 million in sales. And when you got 1 to 5 million in sales, lots opens up, as you're going through that. So it's about seeing that whole journey, Greg, and it's about making sure the technology matches the customer, matches the business, and that you can leap each of those relatively difficult chasms throughout the journey.
Absolutely. So in thinking about startups, and every startups, they have to make strategic decisions early on. So just briefly, maybe you can describe Kenota's platform, its application, what it's solving, its diagnostic capability, and then the medical applications that you're focusing on. Also, maybe share a bit about how you identified those end users and applications early on as well.
Yeah, no problem. So, the benefit that I had was I came into an organization that had talked to a lot of allergists to start with. And so there was good documentation on the problem. And so, and I then brought in the lens of the business and where we were going. And so what we did in looking at it was like, okay, well, this is a unique application. The allergist is, believe it or not, an incredibly high throughput point of care, customer. They run, hundreds, if not thousands of tests per day in the current form of skin prick testing and in some lab-based blood testing. And so we had this unique environment, and we had to understand that they were also being squeezed from all sides as a profession. And they were being squeezed on reimbursements for individual visits, reimbursements for skin prick testing. There's family doctors that were looking to take on allergy, which were sort of taking away the professional and sometimes not doing a very good job of the diagnosis with the tools. And so they were pushed from all sides. And what we found is if they had a technology that would empower their art as allergists, they would get really excited about it. And so when I came in, I looked at it and I said, okay, there's only so many hills that you can take when you're in medical. So it's like core sensor technology, sample type, point of care versus lab, there's the quantitative versus a semi-quantitative or even a purely qualitative test. So you have to choose which hills you're going to tackle. Because if you do new everything across the board, chances are you're never going to be able to jump all those chasms that I talked about in terms of funding. So like the original company that I was working with, Kenota, they were looking at interstitial fluid, which was kind of cool. It's like, hey, we're extracting this new type of plasma-like thing. But a new sample type in diagnostics is almost like a 5-year journey with publications and acceptance and growth. It's like, well, do we need to tackle that? Well, how much is a finger pricker? 30 cents. Well, would whole blood work just as well? Probably. Let's give it a try. Hey, it works. Okay, let's not tackle a brand new sample type. We are already. I mean, the allergy diagnostics is done with serum or plasma. We're already moving to finger stick whole blood, which has enough challenges in it altogether, but it's not a brand new sample type. So it's like, okay, let's not tackle that one. So it's like, okay, the marker that we're looking at, it already has regulatory, status. And in terms of the clinical case is well established. It already has reimbursement, CPT codes, all those other things. It's like the allergist knows the diagnostic algorithm that they use for these things. It's like, okay, let's not tackle something new clinical. Because as soon as you bring on a new clinical algorithm, you come out with a whole spectrum of studies you need to do before you'll even get adoption. You'll talk to everybody and it'll be really cool. And all the early adopters will tell you about how amazingly needed it is. But the vast majority won't adopt it until it hits that, early, late majority in adoption. And so it can take years and years and years for a relatively slow conservative medical space to adopt something new that requires a change in clinical case. So that's something I learned at, my last company. I was like, okay, guys, let's not tackle the standard of care because that's not going to be a quick entry. So we decided to leave that hill. So we tackled lab to point of care. We tackled plasma to whole blood finger stick. We tackled fully automated, fully controlled, error-proof, diagnostic systems. So we made a system that basically runs stacks of cartridges, and those stacks of cartridges are like, the little COVID lateral flow tests you might have had. But just imagine, 30 of those all together in a neat cartridge. We just put in a blood sample, press go, and it just automatically analyzes them. So cool things like, well, we made them customizable. I guess I got to hold this close to my head here. We made them customizable so that they stack and slide together, and so you can combine them all together into an individual stack. Those were important elements for us to be able to customize a panel, very rapidly and readily. So we chose our battles in terms of what we were doing, Greg, and made sure that it met the customer's needs all the way along.
Yeah, that really sounds like an intelligent approach because you need to have significant adjustments and pivots, especially as a startup or an emerging company. As there's only a certain amount of runway in, money, time, and energy you have. So really, you got to pick your battles. You have to de-risk, what markets you're going after, understand that market feedback, and you guys understood that and how it influenced your product development process. So that's part of an important process, in order to survive, as an early stage company. So it sounds like you guys really threaded that needle. So talking about another subject about partnerships. So I would imagine partnerships and collaborations play a big role in a startup's journey, and having strategic alliances should be particularly impactful. For Kenota, what type of partnerships did you have or collaborations in reaching your goals outside of your internal group?
Yeah. So, I mean, they fit kind of all the way across the board, from design to manufacturing to commercial. And I think at an early stage where we're pre-commercial still, it's all about filling your tool bank of options for when you get commercial. So, I mean, on the development side, obviously we had good, design firms that we work with to help, supplement the team and develop the core tech. We worked with an automation partner that was awesome. So like when we were building the foundations of our cartridge, we went to the industry leader in the space and said, look, this is what we're thinking of doing. And we painted a picture of a vision. And we said, now, how do we ensure that as we build this, it will fit your automation equipment, because the cost is so important in the overall business model. So those partnerships were incredibly helpful and fruitful in realizing the vision. But on the commercial side, it's about creating enough options commercially so that you have a tool bag of good relationships. Sometimes we get like, a letter of intent or something more formal we could share with investors and say, look, this is our commercialization partner option one, this is our commercialization partner option two, but those, they have to hang out and kind of wait in that simmer state until you actually put your foot to the floor commercially, and then you engage all those. But those conversations are so important because it's about the story, right? With a diagnostic company, we start off with a 30-second elevator pitch and like, here's our customer, here's why they need it, here's how much they'll pay, this is how much money we'll make, and this is why it's an awesome story. But that's great. Now you have to start going down in a layer and down in a layer and down in a layer. And I like to think of it like a chess game. And it's like you have to have thought through, a number of moves ahead. And so the partners are all about making sure that you have, all the answers along the way to fill that in. So as a good example, like one company that we went to, they're making one of our key components, so one of our, higher risk components in our test. And so when we establish and we look at it, as a relationship, not as a, transactional, event, we start to say, okay, well, what drives, your performance? What drives your success as a manufacturer? Well, it's the amount that we sell per hour of production time. And it's like, well, what are your current batch sizes? And what if we, synced up, with a comfort factor, that you would always be able to produce a minimum amount, but instead of throwing away and having to do 2 batches if you don't hit our quantity, we'll create a flexible scenario where whatever batch size you make, we'll take it, but the scaled pricing will be, to the upper tier, that we move back and forth. So what it allows the manufacturer to do is like, okay, it puts predictability in. So you're charging me more because sometimes your yield will be lower, and sometimes you'll need to do 2 batches to deliver my order. Well, with good communication, we can just get to the point where I'll take your 1 batch every time, and maybe it'll last just a little less on the production schedule. But at the same time, you now no longer have to price me into sometimes 2 batches. And it becomes a win-win on either side. And so, we can work collaboratively on performance metrics. We can work collaboratively on pricing. We can work collaboratively in different areas. And I think when you approach the relationships that way with your partners, whether it's sales or manufacturing or commercial, you're looking for that combined win. And that requires a really honest understanding of what makes their world work. And you have to own their side of the equation in the relationship. It's like, how do you make money? How do you become successful? And you understand what makes them win. And then you look for the combined win for both sides. And so that's been, our strategy. And we found it, very good in many different ways.
Yeah, that's, that hits the nail on the head, beyond the technology or the medical application, really scalability, commercialization, tooling, piece parts, sterilization, packaging, optimization, partner relationships, really understanding the business model beyond, developing the technology and incorporating that in early. Again, it's all about intelligent process, but also de-risking, right? Because, you pick the wrong partner or you set up the wrong relationships, and no matter how good of a job you've done from a development standpoint, it could unwind. So certainly Kenota is lucky to have you, in setting that process in place, because that's hitting on all 8 cylinders, in order to be successful. So just switching subjects, talking about funding. So securing funding often is one of the toughest parts of a journey. And can you tell us a bit about Kenota's fundraising journey? Any lessons learned in structuring those initial investor conversations all the way through to late funding stages? Any ideas, thoughts, or input you may give our audience to give them some insight in that regard?
Sure. I'll first put the disclaimer in there that I've been predominantly product and vision, and our founder Mufid has done the fundraising, and the kudos go to him on figuring out the fundraising algorithm. But what I can share is what I've learned through observing him in that success. And I think that's probably the first point, which is we expect founders to do everything. And we applaud the one-man show. We hear about Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. And I think that it does a huge disservice to a lot of entrepreneurs, because the reality is anything good that happens in life is often done in a team environment. And that team environment requires complementarity. And so because of my skill set, I was able to take on product, quality, regulatory, management, some degree operations, while we were smaller. And so I could do all that, which freed up, the CEO to be the outside voice of Kenota, to paint the vision, to be taking hundreds of phone calls with investors, and to be running a process. And I think that Mufid is inherently a salesperson. So what I would tell any founder is, if you're an engineer or a scientist and you're introverted and you're going and you think you're going to go out and do this, fundraising thing, you have to really ask yourself some honest questions, because, if you wouldn't love the intellectual activity of learning how to become a salesperson, and you don't enjoy lots and lots of conversations and interactions, and you're not energetic, and everybody doesn't want to go out and have a beer with you, and you're going to have to hit that pavement over and over and over again and hear hundreds of rejections, you probably want to partner with someone who can do that for you. And so you can do it. Like, I do believe that intelligence can overcome preference, but you've got to swallow a really big pill as an introverted engineer if you're going to go out and, pound the pavement, or you've got such an incredibly compelling tech story that it takes so little communication on your part, and you can go back into your lab and whittle away at your cool stuff. So one, you got to know yourself. You got to know yourself as a founder and realize this is a sales process. You've got to be able to be likable. You've got to be able to communicate. You've got to be on the ball. You got to be able to follow up. You got to observe what's working and what's not. And you've got to be able to iterate the message based on real-time feedback. You got to be all of that and energetic and handle lots of rejection again and again and again and again. Mm-hmm. And so, if you can manage to prepare yourself mentally for that journey, you're going to be way better off.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. And you are correct. Steve Jobs while he did an incredible job, there was thousands of people behind him, supporting any vision that he had. So certainly there's many spokes on the wheel. And, I certainly appreciate that thought process. And you're right. A lot of founders have to ask themselves the hard questions, relative to their veracity of their appetite in leading the charge in, getting funds and putting the company's name out there in technology, and certainly finding a partner or somebody else within a company that could manage that better or is more attuned to those activities is critical, because, it's not meant for everybody, for sure. So as you've progressed and Kenota's progressed throughout the product development process, What are some challenges that you're currently tackling, and what anticipated hurdles that may exist on the horizons or challenges that may occur? And how does your team prepare for those challenges?
So, I think the biggest challenge for any company is that to get something to the point where it launches and it functions to the specification every time, all the time, and flawlessly, and all the QC metrics are right in manufacturing, and all of the tests lead and correlate directly with the performance that you've got, that's a really tall order. And so the problem that I see is, and there's a reason, at least in diagnostics and probably, to some degree in other areas, you've got a massive amount of investment you need to be able to do to get the product to that level of reliability. But regulatorily, you're required to have that level of repeatability, before you even have a sale in the bank. And that's
And scalable.
expensive and difficult.
So
Yeah,
you have
exactly.
to repeat it, but also it has to be scalable. So that's,
Correct.
yeah.
And so the way I look at it is we paint a picture of the end. We're really clear about what the end looks like. How are we going to do all of these things when we're making millions of these things, tens of millions of these things, hundreds of millions of these things? And from the end, we work backwards to where we are today. And what we've got to make sure we do as we set the structure in place, the work instructions, the SOPs, to produce something, those QC tests, we have to make sure that the end still is achievable when we can't bite it all off at once.
Mhm.
And so I think that is always the biggest challenge. And at some point when you enter the market, it's like trying to change the tires while the car's driving down the road. And so, you have to be really, really careful that, you've done creative things to enable that. It's like, well, that's impossible, Chris. It's like, well, not if I put a little wheel underneath each wheel that could pop down and bring that up, and some guy else is like holding on with the trolley on the side and he's got his impact wrench changing the tires. Like, well, that's the kind of creativity you need in medical device. It's like you start off with the problem and you're like, well, okay, well, I'm going to have to engineer in that capability so it's there by specification, so that when I validate the overall product clinically and analytically, I verify it, I'm going to be able to make sure that I can do the changes that I need to do over time. And the FDA has done some cool stuff lately. They're basically asking ahead of time now, like, what are you planning on changing when you move forward? And we'll kind of review that with your 510K as we roll it in there. And I think that's really smart because it allows the company to communicate intentionality about evolution as you enter the market, and what new software features are you adding, and how are you going to be upgrading things, and how are you going to be responding to customer. And it allows them to look at that and make sure that it fits within the change control paradigm that they're espousing. So that's the biggest challenge. We're in that stage now where we're trying to grow panel, we're trying to grow market, we're trying to grow new opportunities and still get regulatory clearance and make sure that we can still achieve all these things and change the tires as we need to while driving down the road.
That sounds great. Yeah, it's really planning ahead of time, de-risking, being ready to pivot, and that's really where it's at. It's when I look at the grand scheme of things, it's all intelligent strategies that allow us to de-risk and then reach our goals, and that's what it's all about. And sometimes they manifest and they reveal themselves quickly. Other times, it's digging a lot of ditches in order to resolve those solutions. So my next question is, what personally, what excites you about the future of medtech, especially with regards to diagnostics? And are there any emerging trends or technologies that you think will help shape Kenota's path or even diagnostic industry's path?
Yeah, I think it's it's at a fascinating point. So the way I, look at diagnostics, and I've had the benefit of playing in, nucleic acid amplification on one side, so PCR and isothermal, and I've had the ability to look at, antibody or macromolecule detection in the other space, technologies like lateral flow and ELISAs. So when I look at the space, the exciting thing for me is the evolution of diagnostics out of the existing limitations that we have. And so, I look across and I think about, looking at the amplification complexity. And you've got some really cool companies like Visby and Q Health before they went under. It's like, where they've got these really neat disposable all-in-one amplification tools. And we know that molecular is just so powerful, right? When we can see the small number of copies that come to DNA, it's really, really cool. Crude samples, unprocessed samples, easy to use, plus amplification's kind of cool. But then there's this no amplification technology that's coming in, like lateral flow and others, and they're getting more and more powerful. And so as they get more and more powerful, the gap between the amplification and the no amplification start to converge. And I think what we're going to see is the equivalent of a disruptive innovation where we'll see the chasm close because we've had the dogma that we need the molecular sensitivity and we need that 5 copies or 2 copies, and we need to know whether it's there or not. But it's fundamentally a sample volume and cleanliness problem. And I think what we'll find is the convergence of the two. And I think you'll be able to get no amplification, good enough for purpose, simple collection, super cheap. So we make them complicated and hit all the bars, or we make them super cheap and miss a bunch of the bars. Now we got to sort of kind of converge them together and get super cheap and hit the bars. And what it takes is a good enough business case to demonstrate it's possible. And we'll go ahead and cross the chasm and get the first one across the line. And as we get the first one across the line, then the core technology evolves and evolves and evolves, and more people dive in, and it gets better. And it's more of a classic disruptive innovation. It's like what existed between these two before, and now all of a sudden we're going to go ahead and kick them both out. Like we can do cheap and good enough to sensitivity. And so and ultimately, we all grew up, or many of us grew up in, Star Trek, and we had the tricorder vision, and we all wanted to kind of, make the tricorder in that sense. And I think that we're making one more step towards, that vision. And then that's the way we work as society. Someone paints the picture, artists, movie makers, of what the future could look like, and we all backfill it, and I think that we're very close to that next major step in innovation.
I mean, Star Trek inspired a lot of us. I saw a documentary that Star Trek inspired the mobile phone. So the individuals who created the cell towers and the mobile phone were inspired by Captain Kirk's little communicator. So it's interesting you talk about it. I visualize the democratization of diagnostic devices, right? Where 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it's purely in a lab, and now it's in the patient's hands, and allowing them to do self-diagnosis or control their own fate relative to understanding viral loads or what have you, and really designing it for all different types of users, whether it's home use, and you have a wide array of potential users, and the usage ceremony and the technology and the application needs to be very specific and simple, or point of care, and potentially like CLIA waived, or even in a laboratory. So it's really a new age of diagnostics, and I'm curious where it'll be 10 years from now. Who knows?
It is exciting. It's definitely exciting. And the pandemic did some very important things for diagnostics. And the first thing it did was highlight to the FDA that the risk of slightly more complex tests at the personal level was lower than they had thought. And you see sort of a changing acceptability of that risk associated with an untrained operator making a mistake. And what we've realized is that distributed testing has some risks, but no testing or lack of testing or inadequate testing has a higher risk. And so when we stop looking at it individually as the medical risk benefit and start looking at the society as a whole in the overall risk benefit to society, I think you'll start to see lower fidelity, products come out because the economics and the overall medical risk benefit makes sense. We just have to tweak lenses a little bit, right?
Sure.
And that takes time.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side is, the public, because of the pandemic, has become aware of, being able to buy these devices in CVS or drugstores in order to identify viral load and, tell them, what may be happening. And on a mass scale all at once, the qPCR or PCR or lateral flow assay, whatever it may be, the public realizes, well, these are products, and there's a public demand for that, not just on a pandemic level, but others. So it's sort of being pulled into the marketplace by these end users as well. So it's an interesting dynamic of technology and demand and public awareness and what that reveals for the future. So that's certainly in diagnostics we're going to have a wild ride over the next 10 years, see what shakes loose. So
yeah, very cool. Lots of creative ways of distributing that as well. So you've got companies like Amazon getting into it and
absolutely.
being like, so that's going to be really exciting to see the logistics and the supply chain giants handling human health with diagnostics rolled in. That's going to be a really cool ride to be on over the next day.
Yeah. So Chris, thanks so much for sharing Kenota's health journey and your valuable insights.
Yeah, it was really great to be here. It was nice to see you. Thank you for running such a great podcast, Greg.
Excellent. So this brings us to the close of this episode on the MIDI Innovation Vault podcast, and a huge thank you to Chris Harder for sharing his insights on the story of Kenota Health with us today. We hope you found inspiration in this journey and gained valuable insights into the future of diagnostic technology. And stay connected with us for more conversations with industry leaders. And be sure to follow MIDI on social media for updates. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of MIDI's Innovation Vault podcast, Medtech's Next Wave, Innovators from LSI. We hope you enjoyed hearing about Kenota Health's innovative approach to diagnostics and patient care. Remember to subscribe to the MIDI Innovation Vault and stay tuned for more episodes of Medtech's Next Wave, Innovators from LSI, where we continue to bring you the latest innovations and thought leaders from across the medical technology industry. Until next time, keep innovating and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in healthcare.